if I can take this movie and turn it into a camp or turn it into a sermon, for the kids, it'll feel like I'm speaking their language. And so I just saw it in movies.
Hi, and welcome to Storia, where storytellers disrupt. I'm David Noronha.
And I'm Fabiano Altamura.
And before we dive in with our guests, just remember to like, subscribe, download, or give us a 5-star review. Today we have the privilege of a gentleman named Seth Dahl, man. Tell us about him.
Yeah, so Seth is dear to our hearts over many, many years. And he is a writer and a worldwide speaker to adults and children. He's known for his powerful wisdom, communicated through a contagious joy and childlikeness, 100%. Seth and Lauren love to empower families to build a strong connection that fosters peace and creates a thriving family culture. Seth, Lauren, and their 3 children homestead with a large garden and handful of animals on a small farm in Texas. Dude, welcome to the show, man. How did you come about communicating your message through, film?
Well, I love it. I was a children's pastor for, 16 years, 17 years, full-time in the church. And so I think that's where it came from, is I would watch kids' movies and I would see the message from God in those movies.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, if I can take this movie and turn it into a camp or turn it into a sermon, for the kids, it'll feel like I'm speaking their language. And so I just saw it in movies. And so I started doing it. Like, I would literally take my team. We would go to movies I'll never forget. We went to Inside Out. My intern said, Seth, we have to go see Inside Out. And so we all went and took notebooks, and we went there during the middle of the day, and we all made notes and built an entire camp around emotional intelligence and what's going on internally, and the importance of joy, and how joy requires sadness in order to have its proper place in headquarters. And so I don't know how it exactly happened. I just know I was a kids pastor, and I started seeing messages in movies. And then, being a Christian as well, I've had a lot of pushback from some parents who don't necessarily like some of the agendas that are also being pushed, and they don't necessarily, they're not able to necessarily see God's agenda. And so I just keep in mind the verse John 10:10, where Jesus said, the thief does not come but to steal, kill, and destroy. And so that's where a lot of people get stuck. That's where a lot of people stop, is the agenda of the enemy and Jesus revealing the agenda of the enemy. And they forget sometimes that he kept on going to reveal his agenda of what he would do about the enemy's agenda. And so that's kind of the mindset I have watching movies and stuff, is, hey, I know there's going to be some stuff in here that's anti-family, anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-health. They're trying to push some agendas for sure. But I always go, you know what, Lord, you're going to reveal in here some stuff that you're doing about that, and you're going to communicate something even through this. I feel like the Lord told me years ago, he said, hey, I will put my message in movies because there's millions and millions of kids and families who will never go to church, but they will go to the theater. And so I'll reach out to them on my own, apart from the church. And so that's kind of the approach I take, and how it's played out for me with movies and storytelling.
Seth, we met because after I got up here from LA and I went to the School of Ministry, Fab and I did the School of Ministry at Bethel. I'd done this father-son camp called Son Hero. I was looking for a partner in that, and as soon as I saw your childlike face, because he has this glimmer. It's kind of both childlike and mischievous at the same time, which is what I love about you. But you had this glimmer in your eye, and I was like, I think this guy's crazy enough to take me up on this father-son camp. And over the years, and Fab has helped out a couple times, this thing grew to being hundreds of fathers and so on and so forth. And I've always noticed that you incorporate story. Mm-hmm. Roll me back to, as a kid, what role did story have in your life?
I think I always liked stories as a kid.
Did you play pretend? Did you write and become things? Did you always have a vivid imagination as a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a vivid imagination. I was a big dreamer always. And so, yeah, I think, I can remember playing games. I would make stuff up too. Like I remember just making up clubs. We would make up clubs and have all this stuff that I was president of the club, and we'd go do, it was Club Columbus. We were explorers, and we'd go into the woods and we'd explore and do all. So I definitely always had an imagination. I do think somewhere along the way that got perverted for me, really perverted for me, and
What does
God
that mean, man?
restored
That's a
it and
pretty
gave it.
strong word. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think, well, I porn is an attack on the imagination because the enemy understands how important it is, how much it matters. And so, I was exposed to porn, struggled with it for a long time. I also began to do drugs at 15, 16 years old, started doing drugs. And, then it was only a matter of time before hard drugs, like started with marijuana, hard drugs came in, and, I'm having full on hallucinations. I'm going on trips, acid trips, mushroom trips, then started rolling on ecstasy. And so I had this very open imagination, but it was perverted. It was corrupted and perverted by pornography. The purity on my life was perverted that way. The encounter realm with God on my life was perverted towards drugs, towards that realm as well. And so I guess that's how I would describe perversion. It's just an unhealthy version, an ungodly version, a wrong version that my imagination was engaged in for a long time. But still, it's like I've always had it. But when I got saved and delivered from drugs, like it was just there. And then being a children's pastor is like, you have to be creative. You have to be imaginative. You have to figure out, how do I communicate this to little kids so they actually understand it? And
but I think with you, man, I think it's even more than necessity. And I'm curious, real quick, on this topic of beautiful things that God puts in you getting corrupted or perverted. I have a similar story to Seth. I know you never did drugs, but I got into drugs for a little bit and certainly struggled with porn. I got to see it at the age of 5, and it was like just crack to the brain. I didn't really understand what I was looking at. But here's my question, kind of to both of you, maybe first to Fab and then Seth. Like, I've discovered about myself that actually what I think I seek is adventure, thrill, creativity, the charge of that. And I wonder if one of the reasons why I delved into those things was because of a misguided need or sense of wanting that thrill, that spike. What about...
Well, it's back to the garden, isn't it? The enemy will always try to corrupt God's word.
Yeah.
It's like God puts you in the garden in his perfect presence. He creates that perfect love story for you. The antagonist comes in and puts in that seed saying, well, did he say that? Mm-hmm. He will make you like gods if you eat from this tree, when they were more like God then than they were when they ate the fruit. So I think the devil is always trying to disrupt, like God is trying to disrupt your story back to him. The devil is trying to disrupt God's story away from him, right? So I think in the sense that, in its purest form, people watch pornography because they are trying to medicate something that's going off in them, right? Rather than necessarily watching it for the sake of watching it. It's a medication tool, I guess.
Yeah, it's a fear of intimacy and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, it's always... like you said, it's perversion trying to take you away from the intimacy of what God wants for us.
Seth, you've got a pretty dramatic story. Speaking of stories, man, I mean, I know it's a pretty long journey for you, but tell me a little bit, man, about how, given your past with drugs and so on and so forth, man, like how do you end up coming to God? What was that all about for you? How did that journey go?
Yeah. And I think for me, just to go back to that other question real fast too, I think for me, I don't think the church did a really good job of engaging the imagination and almost treating it like it was evil, because it had been so corrupted and perverted for so long through the enemy, that a lot of times the church, when I was young, it was almost like you weren't supposed to be imaginative. You weren't supposed to go there. And so I know for me, I feel like the imagination was perverted, but I was actually seeking, an encounter with God, and I wasn't going to get it in the church. So I was going to go find it somewhere else without having that language. But yeah, so how I found God was actually, I mean, crazy enough to tell you is I I'll tell you a couple of fun stories that put all this together. But one time we had been eating lots of ecstasy, eating, snorting, mixing ecstasy with acid, ecstasy with mushrooms, ecstasy with coke, and acid all at the same time. Just full on
Cocktail.
Absolutely bonkers.
That's a heavy load, man.
And yeah, it was not good. It was not good. And my friend comes in one day to my house and he goes, Seth, my dad had a dream that we were at somebody's apartment and somebody brought a jar of pills and we started eating the pills and we all just fell down dead. And I said, bro, that's God. God is trying to tell us something. He goes, I know. I grew up in the church. We both had grown up in the church. So we knew like God's trying to tell us something through your dad. And we were kind of like, we should probably quit. We should probably not eat ecstasy. We should probably not eat pills or it's going to kill us. Like something's going to kill us here. Well, we didn't stop. And then later I'm on acid, just acid and weed at this point with my roommate. We're at home and my roommate he turns on this crazy 1980s MTV show that was literally designed for people to eat acid. And it's the most crazy thing I've ever seen. And I'm on, I think 2 or 3 hits of acid at the time. It's so crazy. And I go into this bad trip. I start going on this bad trip and I'm losing it. I'm not okay. I'm not well. I think I'm going to be stuck like this forever. I'm trying to tell my roommate he should probably take me to the psych ward because I'm not well. I'm not okay. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. This is not good. And all of a sudden, in front of my eyes pops like thousands and thousands, maybe millions of screens. And on every screen is a scene from my life, one scene from my life. And I'm literally watching my entire life flash before my eyes. It's a full-on hallucination, but I'm watching it in my head every moment of my entire life. And all of a sudden, Jesus is right there in the middle, hanging on the cross, and he's looking at me. And he goes, this is why your mom said, don't do drugs. Something like that. This is why they said, don't do drugs. And he goes, boom, and he just dies right in front of me. And as soon as he dies, I snap out of it completely. I go completely sober, and I'm like, I got to change something. Then 9/11 happened, and I'm going, I really got to change something. And then I get fired from my job. I had a job that my roommate got me, and it was the only thing keeping me sort of normal. Like I really loved it. I really enjoyed it. I was a chef, training to be a chef.
Oh, wow.
And I was cooking all this great food. I was so happy, and it kept me somewhat on the ground. And then I get fired, and I go home, and I'm like, you know what? I have nothing to live for. I'm going to kill myself. Put a gun in my mouth, was about to pull the trigger, and I said, I wish I would have listened to my parents. I wish I would have listened to my teachers. I wish I would have listened to my pastors. I wish I could just start my life over. I wish I could just be born again. And I hear the words come out of my mouth. I'm like, I know where that came from. Right then, somebody walks into my room through the wall, right through the window, walks in, stands there. I can't see them, but I know they're there. And I hear, clear as day, I hear, you must be born again. And I said, Jesus, if you can make me born again, you got to do it or I'm going to pull the trigger. And I just wept myself to sleep, confessing sins were forcing their way out of my mouth, and I fell asleep. And I wake up the next day totally delivered from drugs and completely changed. Like I walked outside, I'm like, wow, I've never seen the trees so green, the leaves so green, the grass so green, the sky so blue. I've never seen anything like this. Everything was brand new for me. And so that's how I came. It was like these little moments where he would reach out to me. He would try to communicate to me. He's reaching out to me. I would stand in the mirror and look at myself, and I started having all these thoughts before that. I would look in the mirror and I would look in my eyes and I would go, you're better than this. What are you doing? You are so smart. Why are you ruining your brain? What are you doing to yourself? You are too good for this. And I was having all these thoughts, and now I know, oh, the Lord was just trying to get me back to him little by little by little. And then that's the moment where it all happened.
They talk about the disruptive storyteller. It's
right.
like
I mean,
Jesus.
his pursuit is unrelentless, isn't it? Like he's willing
Yeah.
to do anything to disrupt.
The scene with all the TVs reminds me of like Truman Show.
Right, yeah,
The
where
effect
you
with
see
all the
all those
images,
scenes,
yeah.
it's amazing. You talk a lot before, Seth, you talked a lot about, some movies that you may communicate the gospel to parents with that, may affect them, may offend them, and you find the Lord in a lot of different movies. I know you're really, really clear on getting rid of the religious spirit, right? And I know we've talked before, and we just did a conference together where Seth was speaking and I was doing a little session. But explain a bit how you overcome that, Seth. Like, what is for you getting rid of the religious spirit, specifically when it comes to you kind of communicating through stories and stuff?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. That's a bit of a journey. The religious spirit, if you just pay attention in the Bible, like one day the Lord just showed me. He's like, the man with the legion of demons comes up. He's suicidal. He's got supernatural strength. He lives in the tombs, all this stuff. He runs up to Jesus, worships Jesus, and Jesus just quickly, simply dismisses 2,000 demons, legion of demons. Into 2,000 pigs, they run off the hill. I'm like, wow, that dude is possessed by devils. And Jesus just easily, quickly dismisses them. Like they're begging him to put them in the pigs, right? Like they're begging as they know they're about to be dismissed from the man. And the Lord goes, I never did that with the spirit of religion. And like, oh, you didn't just cast out religion. You didn't just remove it. You didn't just go, hey, religious spirit, get out of the Pharisees. No, these guys were trying to kill him over and over and plotting and scheming and hearing him teach and watching him do miracles and just getting more and more locked in to their religious stuff going on in their heads. And so it is a bit of a journey. I think some of what it comes down to is understanding that the religious spirit is probably clearest seen in the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders in the Bible. If you pay attention to that, you have Jesus coming up against the spirit of religion and the spirit of religion coming up against him as clear as you possibly can. I mean, it's all throughout the Bible, but it's really clear with Jesus and the Pharisees and those leaders. So all of that to say, I think what Jesus was trying to communicate is that God is with people, and the people that you don't think he could be with, or the people that you don't think he would be with. And so what the spirit of religion was trying to do is put all these boundaries around people and putting God in a certain location rather than, oh, now he's a human walking around, God in flesh. Now he's Emmanuel, God with us, walking around, interacting, talking to, ministering to the people that you think he should not be doing that with. And it's interesting. It's like religion will tell you things like God can't be near sin. God won't be near sin. God can't go near sin. He's so holy. I'm like, well, Jesus kind of messed that whole thing up when he showed up on the earth. Like, well, he is God in flesh. He is God in flesh, second person of the Trinity, walking around, interacting with all the sinners. And it's the people who think they're not sinners who are the ones that can't interact with him and can't receive from him and can't get transformed by him because they're so busy doing it on their own. And so I think for me, that's one thing to keep in mind with this kind of stuff is to go, God can reveal himself anyway, anytime. He can speak through anything. He can speak through a billboard. He can speak through a cardboard box that just has something on the side of it. He can speak through a secular, what we would call secular song. He can speak through anything he pleases. I mean, he created it all. It all belongs to him. He can interrupt whatever he wants to interrupt whenever he feels like it and use whatever he wants. And so I think that's what we need to do is go, oh, I can't put him just in a box. I can't keep him just in the book. I am a massive believer in the Bible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that threw the Bible out, and that's not smart. I'm a believer in the Bible, and at the same time, I'm like, well, the world could not contain the books that would be written about him if we wrote everything down about him. So it's like, oh, not everything Chris Valentin likes to say all of the Bible's in the kingdom, not all of the kingdom's in the Bible. And of course, that can be perverted and corrupted as well. But it's true. It's true. And so, I just look for him everywhere. I look for him to talk to me everywhere. I believe he's with me. I believe he's in me. I believe he wants to guide me and direct me. And he wants to guide me and direct me in things that the Bible can't tell me about. The Bible's not going to tell me where to live unless it's in the Middle East. The Bible's not going to tell me who to marry. The Bible's not going to tell me what to name my kids unless I name them a name in the Bible. Like there's just a lot of stuff that we need to be led by the Spirit, which that's the great privilege of being a believer, is that we can be led by the Holy Spirit, not get pushed around by religion. And so there's so much to it, but that's where I would start, is like religion tries to put God in a location, and Jesus goes, I will be in the locations you think I'm not supposed to be, with the people you think I'm not supposed to be around. And that is the very thing that will keep you from getting from me what everyone else I'm not supposed to be around is already getting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded of the fact that he not only did he engage with people, he had them over for dinner, for Pete's sake. You talk about disrupting the story. At BCA, we have a lot of young artists that come from diverse backgrounds, some of them from what we would describe as religious, more religious households, which can be a confusing term both inside and outside of the church, because if you're outside of the church, I would be described as a religious person, but I wouldn't describe myself as a religious person.
Yeah.
And that's just simply because I read the Bible, I go to church, I identify as Christian, and so on and so forth. I think for those of you that might be listening that maybe are not familiar with this terminology, or maybe even get offended by this terminology, what Seth and Fab and I are talking about is the very spirit that Jesus came to overturn, and also the political spirit and other things as well. It's anything that is anti-God, anti-Christ. But one of the questions that comes up, and one of the things that we're trying to understand better and tackle at BCA, is this idea of what kinds of stuff can believers make, create, engage in. And Seth, what I hear you say is what I saw demonstrated in Jesus is healing. And sometimes we limit the creativity of God to just those things that were more easily expressed by a Jew who was walking the dusty, with sandals on in the Middle East. And that is, I look at how he healed, right? So you look at the creativity that the Lord demonstrated. He could heal at a distance. He could heal with spit and mud. I mean, you can't get more creative than that. He even did it on the quote unquote wrong days in the wrong places. So I think what Seth is addressing is limiting a limitless God. And one of the things that we have to tackle at BCA, and Seth, I'd love your input on this, is so I, like you, engage with my kids in lots of different kinds of stuff. Fab, I'm sure you do as well. I mean, as artists, as creatives, and you being the creative pastor that you are, but you have a reason why you engage your kids. And in another conversation that we were having, you walked us through how you as a father, because this is not just theoretical for you. You're more than just a pastor. You're raising your own kids. How do you engage with film and television in your home? And what does that look like in your home?
Yeah, we have some boundaries.
Like what? Make it practical. Maybe there's a mother and a father out there, they've got kids or whatever. Throw out some ages, throw out some thoughts and some practical things for them as well.
Yeah, so, I would just throw this out there first. All social media, anything social media, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, all of those, you're supposed to be 13 years old before you're allowed to use them. And so I just think it's wise as parents who love Jesus to not allow the world to have stronger boundaries with our kids than we do.
Yeah,
and so, my daughter is 12 right now. She's about to get her own social media for her business that she runs. And so she's going to have that. I think a great boundary that I've been recently kind of messed up by is to be creators, not consumers. And so I think putting boundaries around technology, especially social media, should be that. Like, if you're creating, that's completely different than if you're just consuming. And I want to put boundaries around.
Unpack that a little bit, brother. Like, what do you mean? Like, creating in what way?
Yeah. So I think if it's jumping on your phone and filming something and creating a post that's going to do something for someone else, not just selfies, like, look at me, all of that. To me, that's not really creative. but like creating content in my daughter's context, it's like, hey, she's going to sell products and create posts that are selling things that actually help people. And so that's kind of what I mean, like your kids do that. I pastored all of them. Like those kids are doing their podcast and talking about topics and having conversations with people. And I'm like, that's them being creators, not just consumers.
Gotcha.
My son, who's like, let me show backflips. Let me do backflips on camera and put it out there. And like, kids are literally messaging him like, I learned how to do a backflip because of you. I've been
awesome.
trying to do backflips and I finally got them because of you. You showed me that I could do backflips, like stuff like that, where it's like, oh, you're an influence, not just being influenced. So however that looks, that could look different for different kids and stuff like that.
What boundaries?
But I think,
what boundaries do you put in place as a dad? Like, okay, so your kids, at least two of them at least, are influencing and creating content and products that are beneficial to other kids in the world. But how do it's also an open door. It goes both ways. Do you have any practical tools that you have in place to guard them from some of the stuff that's not good?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, they don't have their own devices that they can just go online with by themselves. We have one iPad that we kind of all share. We also have one TV in our house that we all share. Not that we don't, like, we're not opposed to having more TVs, but the reason we have one and that they don't have their own devices is because one of the boundaries we have is we want technology to bring us together, not isolate us, move us apart. Okay. And so if my three kids have their own device and they go off to their own room to watch a show or do something, they're just going off on their own to go wherever, and whatever can happen, can happen. But if they're all together, it's like, hey, we watch something together. We work out the problems of who's going to pick the show today and what we're going to watch. And they navigate through some of that, but it's actually being used in a way that brings them together. They have 5 or 6 YouTube channels they're allowed to watch. And if they want to watch a new one, that's great. They can just show us what it is. I can watch some of their content, or my wife can watch the content and make a decision like whether or not we're okay with that. And if we're not, we explain it to them. My kids right now have a phone called the Wise phone, which allows them to call and text and use maps and stuff like that, but they can't access the internet. They don't have an app store. They don't have games or anything like that. And so if they want to play games, they got to play it on my phone or on the iPad. If they want to access the internet, they've got to use one of our computers. That way, we're just, I think it's our job as parents too to like protect them from this. If you saw a shady van driving down the road and pulling over and some weird dude trying to talk to your kid and get your kid in the van, you'd probably stop them. You'd probably stop them and you'd probably figure out how to get your kid away from there. Like, well, all of us got devices that can be a shady van driving through the house looking for kids to pick up.
I think I remember him describing it as a front door, like only having one front door into your house, which I think was really wise.
What advice would it be if you had a child of 50 years old who was, trying to get on social media but was a bit of an old man? And what advice would you have for David Neronia?
It's such a cruel way to talk about yourself, Fab, bro. You're not that old.
I'm not. What advice would you give to David Neronia?
Hey, Seth, we've got a couple
Be
minutes.
Yourself. Be yourself. That's it.
It's so hard. I mean, I'm younger, better looking, and taller. It's a tough thing for him to deal with, Seth.
It's hard. I know. It's like God's disrupting one kind of other story.
But both of you are so handsome. I don't know how you're. Yeah.
Oh shucks. We'll have you on every week. Seth, we've got a couple minutes left, man, and we've talked about story. We talked about Jesus disrupting story. We talked about you as a dad disrupting the narrative that culture is trying to influence your kids with, and so on and so forth. What do you hope, as a dad, but also like as a pastor, what do you hope the church is going to do and say over the next 10, 20 years when it comes to disrupting the story that culture is telling?
That's a good question. It is a good question.
I think, we believe that God creates intentionally, and what he creates is the best. And so I think what the church is going to demonstrate, what believers are going to demonstrate, one of the cores, which this is what I've given my life to, is that God is going to have families on the earth that are so healthy, so free, so powerful, so creative, so connected, so strong that the world who doesn't believe in God can look at them and go, oh, you just showed me why man and woman are a great idea. You just showed me why having kids is a great idea, why it's so life-giving. It's so good. So I think one of the things that God is aiming at, like, what is the story? The story is all about a family, a father, a spirit, and a son creating other children in their image, who also create other children in their image. And so I think the whole story is about family and losing family and getting them back and what it takes and what's required. But I also believe there's coming a time in the next 10 to 20 years where the world will go, okay, all right, now we can see why. For way too long, it's kind of been this religious thing. It's like God's way is the best way. Everything else is really bad. And like, well, according to us, this looks better. This looks better than what you got, all you religious people. This looks way better than your marriage, way better than your family. And so I think God's flipping that and he's editing that. We're talking about story the whole time. And like the whole time I got that verse in my head, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter, the author and finisher of our faith.
Yeah.
Like the devil wants to come in and edit that story, and he's just refusing. He's gonna go through. It's like Bill's books. I don't know if you know this, but when Bill came out with a book a long time ago, and they translated it into another language, and the translators didn't like what Bill had written theologically, and so they edited the whole thing and made it say what they wanted it to say.
Wow.
And somebody from that culture came up and goes, "Hey, Bill, your book in English is completely different than your book in this language." And so they had to go through and re-edit everything that the author had originally written. They had to go in and re-edit and make it say what he wanted it to say, what he originally said, because someone else snuck in and interpreted it and edited it and rewrote it according to what they wanted. And I feel like that's what God is doing. He's the perfecter of this story of faith, of families, not just the author. He's the perfecter, which means he's going to go in and go, the devil introduced drugs into your life and started editing the story that I've written. Well, I'm going to bring my eraser in here, my delete button. I'm going to delete that out, and I'm going to write some new stuff in. I'm going to delete that old life that he tried to put you in, and I'm going to give you a brand new one. And so I think that's what God is doing. I think the world is about to see there's about to be a massive difference between believers and unbelievers. And it's going to be in the area of health, mental health, emotional health, physical health, all of it. That the world's going to look at people and go, how did you do this? Why is that family great? Why do you like each other? Why do you love each other? I've never seen kids and parents actually enjoy each other like this. What is this? What is going on here? Why are you mentally well? I think that's what's coming. And I think that's the story he originally wrote. I think it's the story he edited. He came in to edit with Jesus, is to go, hey, I'm actually going to kill your old person and turn you into a new one, a brand new one the world's never seen before. And you're going to look like me again. And the world's going to look at you and go, all right. And talk about creative ways to heal people. It's like, Jesus is healing people with his words in other cities. And then Peter's just walking down the street and people are getting healed by his shadow. Like, oh, wow. They could look at Peter and go, if I just get around him, things are going to change. Things are going to be better. And I think that's what's coming back to us again, is that the world can look at us and go, I need to be around you because something's different, something's new, something's better. That's better than what I have. And so
the thing is,
I think that's what's coming.
Yeah, and the thing is, everything's about going back to the Father, isn't it? The stories we tell, it's always about going back to him to find out who we are. It's all about identity. That piece of, his story is, all right, come back to me. You're not an orphan. You're a son and a father. You're a son. You're a daughter. And I love that, Seth, with your books and everything. It's all about bringing the family back together. Dude, it's been so amazing to have you. We love hanging out with you on the podcast and outside of the podcast. Thanks for kind of just disrupting culture. Actually, we're disrupting the culture now, but you're actually bringing back to God's standard. So, dude, we love you, man. Love to Lauren and the kids. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for disrupting the story of family today, brother, and restoring it back to God's. Guys, it's been great hanging out with you on Storia today. Remember to like, Download, give us that 5-star review, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.
All right, bless you all.